Hello, and welcome to today's video. I have something a little different for you today, and it requires a teeny tiny little bit of explaining. If you're already familiar with my approach to gut health, and you're already familiar with the concept of permaculture, then this explanation is not really going to be necessary. But I'm expecting there's going to be a big crossover of people that either don't understand permaculture or don't know my approach to gut health just yet. So I just want to explain what these are. So permaculture is a different type of agriculture. This is a way of growing produce and creating a productive growing environment that is more supportive of long-term soil health, productivity, and is kind of a closed loop system. So you're not dependent on fertilizers. You don't necessarily need to use heavy machinery. We can significantly reduce or completely avoid the use of pesticides and herbicides. And these things not only help to improve the biodiversity of the given environment, but they help to improve yield and the nutrient density, the amount of ingredients that our body needs that we can extract from these foods is significantly higher. And I saw this parallel between how this fits with my approach to gut health, which is we don't want to do anything invasive. We don't want to take antibiotics or antimicrobials. We want to support digestive function. And seeing these two things in parallel, it made me realize that my approach to gut health is essentially like no dig or permaculture for your gut. So I thought it would be really fun to do a video where I go through and talk about the 12 permaculture principles as outlined by David Holmgren, who's kind of like the founder or the father of this kind of thought process. And I want to explain how this fits with my approach to gut health. And it's honestly, it's amazing. Like if you have any interest in regenerative agriculture, if you any interest in gardening, and you're also interested in being healthy and taking care of yourself, and especially like gut health, if you're like a bit of a gut health nerd like I am, or anything gut health related I want to learn, combining these two things in thought process, this video is going to absolutely blow your mind. So let's start from the top. We're going to do the 12 principles and we're going to work down. I'm going to talk about it in the principles of how this works in a garden, and then we're going to look at how this works in your gut as well. So first of all, observe and interact. The whole premise of this is instead of jumping in and kind of taking desperate action and start trying to exert change straight away, just slow down and look at what's happening and almost kind of conduct small scientific experiments. So obviously as the seasons change, a garden changes. And in our body, that might look a bit different. That might look like as your appetite changes, you want to eat different foods. And then we can observe, how is your body responding to these different foods? How does it handle meat? How does it handle FODMAP vegetables? How does it handle sulfur containing things like, let's say like onions and garlic? How is it responding to these? Does it like cooked food versus raw food? Does it like juices? Observe the different inputs that are coming into the body and see how the body responds. And we can learn so much from this. I've worked with thousands of clients now. And one thing most of them have in common is they've spent thousands, even tens of thousands on different lab tests and these kind of functional diagnostic options. When in my opinion, in truth, symptoms are the best form of feedback that we have. And this essentially is exactly what this is. It's observe and interact. That's what symptoms are. They're observations. The body is showing us things and we're going to observe them. So this principle is the core. It's the foundation of how permaculture works, because you're trying to work with nature, and in the body, we're trying to work with the body. So we're observing it, we're seeing what's going on. And instead of forcing a very significant change, we're just going to observe and make very small changes. The second principle is to catch and store energy. In the terms of permaculture, what this really looks like is collect wood chips. Like if you have like a bunch of wood and you chop it down, don't just get rid of it. Keep them, use them. If it's raining, collect the rain, store that grain. This is going to be useful because you're going to need it in the future. If this is in the early spring or later in the autumn, you could look at having a greenhouse. We're capturing that sunlight and we're storing that so that we can extend the growing season. So we're essentially thinking about catching and storing energy. But what does this look like inside of the body? You could think about this in a few ways. The first could be to take nutrients and to take resources, calories. So we want to make sure that the body is well fed and well nourished, because that is where all of health comes from. The body can't just make healing happen. It needs ingredients and it needs resources to be able to do that. So we want to try to catch and store as much of this as possible. So we want to have high nutrient density. We want to make sure we have all of our B vitamins. We want to make sure we have minerals. We want to make sure we have antioxidants. We want to make sure that we're storing all of these things. You can also look at this a little bit in the microbiome, because I'd argue that one way that we can catch and store energy is by catching and storing diversity of microbes in our gut. So we want to essentially create a favorable environment in the gut where when for some reason we are exposed to a new microbe, maybe we go to a different country and we go to the desert and we pick up a microbe there, or maybe we go and swim in a natural pond and we pick up a microbe there. We want these microbes to be able to come and join us, and we want to collect these and these to become part of our native flora, because diversity is really important, but we're going to come to that in another point in a little while. But I would consider this a form of storing, collecting and storing energy in the body. Third, and maybe arguably one of the most important points, both in a garden but also in the body, is to obtain a yield. So in a garden, this is obvious. This is, you want fruits, you want veggies, you want, if you've got chickens, you want them to be producing you eggs. If you're growing trees, you want firewood. Whatever it is, you want to get something that's of benefit to you. You want to take something from the land that's useful to you. This doesn't have to look like a material. This could be a little side garden with a lot of flowers that brings pollinators. That is still a yield. Bringing those pollinators is a yield. This could be flowers that you grow just so you can bring them into your house and make your house look beautiful. That is a yield. And then when it comes to a yield in the body, you might think, well, that doesn't make much sense, but it does. Why do you care about health? Why do we care about like our gut bugs? Why do we care about our nutrient status? It's because we want to feel good. We want to have energy. We want to sleep really well. We want to age really well. We want to have a good longevity. We want to be strong. We want to have strong immunity and be resilient to disease. All of these things, I would argue, are a yield. These are all yields that we take from all of this investment in our health. And really, that's why we care so much. That's why we care about health. It's because we want all of these yields, all of these outcomes that we want out of it. So I would say, if you're doing all of this work in your garden and you're not getting any fruit, you're not getting any veggies, you're not getting eggs, what are you doing? There's no point. And the same is true in healing. If you're taking loads of supplements, you're spending loads of money, you're putting a lot of effort, and you're not feeling better, what is the point? Like, really, what are you doing? The whole point is that you should feel healthy and happy and have positive emotion and have energy and sleep well and have a sex drive, and you should be full of energy and vitality. That's the whole point. And if you're not getting that, you're missing the point. Point number 4 is to apply self-regulation and accept feedback. This works really well in a garden because, well, it's kind of simply a bit of cause and effect. Let's say you overwater your tomatoes, then they all split and burst, and now you don't have nice tomatoes. Or let's say you don't water them for long enough, and then they go dried up and shrivel and they get diseased. This is cause and effect. We're listening to what the garden is telling us, and we're going to use that to regulate our approach in the future. And again, this fits perfectly with the body. Think about it in terms of symptoms. Let's say you're trying to change the gut microbiome, you're taking a probiotic. If you take too high of a dose, you feel terrible. That's your body trying to give you feedback, and you should self-regulate. But what do a lot of people do? They try to push through. They just keep taking higher and higher doses. They feel terrible, they feel miserable, and it's not working. This is valuable feedback, and we're not paying attention. So we need to learn to accept that feedback. This can also be true in other dimensions. Like, for example, I use an Oura ring. This helps me to track my sleep and recovery scores. It helps to show me my heart rate variability. So it shows me how well I'm resting and recovering. And I, in my mind, always thought that exercise was a little bit too stressful for my body. So I would always take it easy, and I'd see myself as a bit fragile and a bit delicate. But as I've been in the garden, I'm doing like 6, 7, 8 hour days. I'm pushing myself to the point where like my muscles are aching, I'm sore, I go to bed and I collapse. I check my Oura ring and my recovery scores are higher than they've ever been. It's almost like my body needed to be pushed so that it could go into a deeper state of healing and recovery. This again is a form of feedback. And the self-regulation that I've applied to that is, I know that even if I don't feel that good, even if I feel like I feel a bit fragile today, I don't want to push myself too hard, I know it every single time it improves my scores, which for me is this sort of feedback that's saying, this is what you need to do. So I need to be open and receptive to that and receive that feedback. So it's not always about doing too much and needing to back it down a little bit. Sometimes it's that you're not doing enough and you need to push a little bit harder. But it's about basically receiving that feedback, taking it on positively as like a constructive criticism, and then adjusting your approach. So it works very well in the garden, works very well in the body as well. The 5th principle is to use and value renewable resources. This in a garden makes sense. It's self-explanatory. If you've got a bunch of weeds, you can break them down into like a compost tea and reuse that. If you've got a hole that you dig to make a pond or something, take that soil and use it to make a raised garden bed. Reuse things. But I think this principle is a little bit more difficult to apply in the body, but I do still think there is a way that we can do this. So the way that I would think about this is, instead of using a whole bunch of different supplements that you have to buy. So this is kind of like one of the concepts here is to try to keep this system closed as a closed loop, and to avoid too many inputs coming in and too many outputs going out. It's kind of an inefficient system. We'll come more onto that in the next point. But the reason I think it's worth noting here is often we will be using different products, like for example, probiotics as a supplement, and we're bringing them in and we're bringing them in and we're bringing them in. Whereas it can be possible to kind of create a little bit more of a renewable resource kind of angle on it, in that if you were to create your own fermented foods, so for example, you've got your own kefir grains and you're using milk, maybe you're still bringing that milk in from the supermarket, but it's much more renewable because that milk could be literally from next door. Whereas probiotics that you buy, they're probably made in a different country, they get shipped, they've got air miles, they're not really as renewable. They're kind of a bit brutish, a bit forceful in their approach. And I'm not saying don't use them. I used so many different products. I still use products now. They definitely have their place. So I'm not saying get rid of them. What I'm suggesting is we try to lean on this renewable side a little bit more. We try to rely on things that we can get from our local environments. So one thing we want to do on our little homestead is we want to get some goats. This way, instead of having to buy some kefir from the supermarket, I can have my own goats in the garden, milk them, bring the milk in, make kefir at home. Amazing. Complete closed loop. And this brings us really nicely into the next point, which is to produce no waste, which really encompasses this idea that I was explaining before, where we've kind of got this loop where we're trying to reduce the inputs coming in and the outputs going out. We're kind of trying to keep everything in recirculation. So in the garden, this looks obvious. This is instead of bagging up a bunch of garden waste and putting it in a waste bin that gets then shipped off to the council or something, we use that to make a compost. Or instead of having a lot of water that's just flooding out of the property, we're collecting a lot of that and we're using it for irrigation in the times when there is less rainfall, instead of having to use mains water or pumping from a well, for example. So this way we're basically reducing the amount of inputs that are necessary because we're reducing our outputs, and we're reusing our outputs to keep this circle spinning so we don't need to receive anything new. And in the body, this is a little bit challenging because we do need to be able to eliminate. It's important that we are urinating and that we're having bowel movements and that we can sweat. So there are things that are supposed to be leaving the system because these basically become waste residues to us. But these could even be incorporated in the environment. So you can get composting toilets. And let's say your sweat, for example, we can even collect your sweat from a shower, create grey water, which is not dirty enough that it needs to be cleaned, but not clean enough to drink. And we can use that to irrigate plants. So I think overall, this point is the hardest one to apply to the body because you do need to produce some waste. And I will be completely honest, even in a permaculture garden, you will still have some waste. For example, if you have a lot of land, you're gonna need to use some tools. You're gonna need to get a tractor in every now and then. Maybe you're not tilling the floor, but maybe you need to flatten some land. Maybe you need to build a retaining wall. There's a time where you're gonna need these inputs. So we can try to minimize these things. I don't think that there's a place for perfection in any of this. In gardening, in gut healing, I think perfection is the enemy of progress because it just causes you so much stress and it makes it so hard to move forward. But I do think it's admirable endeavor to try to reduce waste as much as possible and to reuse things. Because not only does that reduce our reliance on external things, it also reduces our need for additional inputs because we're reusing a lot of what we have. The seventh principle is to design from patterns to details. So in a garden, this looks like understand where the rain falls. Obviously we want to collect rain from the biggest roof that we have, and we want to be mindful of how does the sun move over the property at different times of the year. It's going to affect where we want to put the greenhouse and where we want to build things. These are big patterns that are going to affect a big aspect of the design. You also want to think about other elements of nature like wind, which areas are more sheltered, which areas are more exposed, and pavements and paths as well. We want to think about where do things move? Not just us as humans, how do we move through the property, through the land? How do other animals move through it as well? We want to think about all of these things. And it's really about thinking about these and then going down into those smaller details. So we want to try to basically make the little details that we add fit with the grand scheme of what nature is trying to do with the space. So instead of trying to force something to happen, we're kind of working in almost like an order of priority. And we understand that it isn't our job to try to get everything perfectly exactly how we want it to be in our mind, but to respect the topography, respect the environment, and to work with it, and then to make it work for us. And this applies so well to the body. If we look at this in terms of the body, this is really to respect the systems that are already in place and to work with the mechanisms that the body already has. So one really springs to mind here is the idea of detoxification. When you hear detoxification, a lot of people will think about doing vitamin IVs or doing chelation therapy or doing these more extreme or aggressive approaches. I would even consider these things like doing peptides, and even to some extent you could imagine doing these super high dose supplements. And a lot of the time that's this kind of more forceful way where we're trying to force the body to do what it wants instead of observing like the natural patterns. Like, how does the body actually detox? What are these mechanisms? How does one compound go from here to here to here to here to here and then leave the body? How does the body naturally do this? And how can we work with that? And then obviously we work with that and we try to make it better. We try to speed it up. We try to make it more efficient. But this way we're really working with the hierarchy of working with the body in the same way that in a garden we want to work with nature. We will overall get a better outcome and we will have to work much less hard. Principle number 8 is to integrate rather than segregate. So the idea here really in my mind is to make things efficient. For example, if you're going to grow some crops that are going to feed, that you're growing primarily to feed your chickens, it makes sense to grow them right next to where the chickens are. We might need to protect them so that the chickens can't just like root them up and completely eat them all. But I've seen some designs that look really nice where you've got kind of like a chicken run or like a chicken coop. And then on the edge, you've got some herbs or some plants that the chickens can then like nibble through the fence, but they can't completely destroy the plant. So this way, it's saving you a job of having to harvest this and deliver it to the chickens. It's much more efficient. And another thing I've seen is having the chicken coop in or near an orchard. This way, we can get some pest control. So the chickens can like eat all the bugs and the insects and stuff, which protects the trees. They can also eat some of the fruit. If you've got some fruit that is like diseased or that falls early, or maybe there's a storm, the chickens can then eat this. And it's food for them. So you're reducing a cost, but in return, you're also improving the quality of the eggs. So you're getting better eggs. You're going to get better fruit because the fruit trees are going to have less disease. And the chickens are basically going to be fertilizing everywhere they run. So they're going to be fertilizing the orchard as well. So this way we've integrated multiple different systems like fertilization, pest control, the location of the chickens, the location of the orchard, and we've combined them all together. So instead of segregating and creating all these like single line systems, we've created this big system that incorporates all things and they actually enhance each other and work together. And when we apply this principle to the body, it's so easy. It's just to think about the whole body as one whole organism. It doesn't have a gut. It doesn't have an adrenal gland. It doesn't have a brain. It doesn't have any of these different systems. It's just one organism. So the best thing that you can do to heal quickly and efficiently is to see the body as a whole organism and work on every single thing at the same time. You might think, oh, I'm going to take this supplement to support my gut, or I'm going to take this to support my microbiome, or this to support this detoxification process. But instead, if we can think big picture and try to figure out how can we support all of these systems simultaneously? And this is one of my favorite things in my coaching. What I do with my clients is usually they'll come with like 50 or 60 supplements. And my goal is to get this down to a list that's like 5 or 6 supplements. But the thing is, each supplement is doing like 10 different jobs at the same time. So like probiotics, for example, can be really nice for the microbiome, but they also help detox. They also help the hormones. They also help produce neurotransmitters. They help with bowel regularity. They stimulate digestive function. They do so many different things all at the same time. So this is what an integrated approach looks like when you're working on the body. Instead of trying to segregate everything into, is a hormone problem, is a gut problem, is a detox problem, is this problem, is a that problem. We're seeing the body as one holistic organism, and we're trying to support the function of everything because everything is interconnected. The gut affects the brain affects the hormones affect the gut. Everything is linked together. Point number 9 is to use small and slow solutions. And I love this. All of these principles just work so well. So in a garden, this is like, instead of just demolish everything and just like burn it all to the ground and just do whatever you want, is to see what's already there and start building on it one little bit at a time. This works really well with that first point, which is to observe and interact, because they go hand in hand. It's like make a small adjustment, observe, make a small adjustment, observe, make a small adjustment, observe. And this way you can better see how the things you are doing are impacting what's happening in the garden. But this also works perfectly in the body as well. If you just throw a whole bunch of different supplements or you try like 10 different modalities at once, you get a bunch of feedback, like the symptoms change, some things get better, some things get worse, and you cannot draw any conclusion as to what caused what. And this comes from rushing. This comes from really feeling desperate and wanting to make things change really fast. You take desperate action and you take huge actions that you just can't draw a conclusion from. And then there's nothing to observe and interact with because you're just lost. You're just hopeless. You don't have any useful data. And I also really like the emphasis on slow solutions. Nature is slow. Being in a calm, regulated nervous system state is slow. Healing happens when you slow down. So when you become aware that there's a problem in your body and you want to help it, you want to provide it a solution, do it slowly. This looks like starting on a really small dose and building it up very gradually over time, observing for how your body responds to that new input. because it means that if it is not the right thing, you're going to observe it before you have a really big reaction and you feel terrible. If it is the right thing, even the right thing in the wrong dose can cause you a problem. So this gives the body time to integrate it and to get used to it and to bring it in as a part of your new healing protocol. So use small and slow solutions. Absolutely lovely principle. Principle 10 is to use and value diversity. In a garden, completely obvious. You want to have a bunch of different crops to harvest. You want to bring lots of different pollinators. You want to have different ways of irrigating. You want to have different ways of storing resources. All of these things build strength and resilience into the system. And the best way that we can look at this in the body, I believe, is in terms of the microbiome, because the number one factor that influences the health of the microbiome overall tends to be the total diversity of microbes. So just to give you an idea, somebody that has chronic fatigue syndrome or fibromyalgia, so these are like some of the most severe health problems you can have, tends to have a microflora diversity of under 500 microorganisms. Now, I know that sounds like a lot, but if you compare this to a normal, average, healthy gut, they have a diversity of between 2,500 and 3,500 microorganisms. So we're talking about like a 60 to 80% loss in overall microbiome diversity in people that have severe chronic health problems. And I'm just using these two as an example, but almost every single chronic non-infectious disease is directly correlated with the microbiome diversity. So as your microbiome diversity decreases, your likelihood of developing a chronic health problem increases, regardless of what it is. It could be gut and digestive symptoms. It could be something like chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia. It could be neurodegenerative, autoimmune. It doesn't matter. Literally like a one-to-one correlation. Less microbiome diversity, higher likelihood of developing some type of chronic health problem. So we really want to use and value diversity in the microbiome. The best way to do this is variety in the diet. So again, variety, value that, value variety in the diet. So I would generally tend to, if you're able to, avoid super restrictive diets, like going any way that completely avoids total food groups. So we want to keep as much diversity as possible. And also, even with things like probiotics and fermented foods, we want to diversify. We want to have sauerkraut, we want to have kimchi, we want to have kefir, we want to try a bunch of different things. We want to have as much of an array of diversity as we can, because that's what builds strength and resilience into the system in the long run. Point 11 is to use edges and value the marginal. This is a really fascinating point. This is a bit of like a niche point in my opinion, but I really like it. It works so well in a garden, and it actually works really well in your gut as well. The point of this point is that borders tend to be the places where we tend to have lots of stuff happening. So if you think about the border between a forest and a field, you will have a lot more biodiversity there, because there are certain organisms that need some aspects from a forest and some aspects from a field. They can't live in a field alone and they can't live in a forest alone. But on that border between where these two environments exist, this is a place where they can thrive. You can also think about this in terms of like a pond and a forest, or a pond and a field. Like frogs, for example, they have the wet area, but they need the dry area. I can see this in my own garden because we've got like a bunch of these like little tiny lizards, and they really like the borders where we've got an edge that's kind of like grassy and full of insects, but also where there's like a stone like outcropping where they can like hide in like a retention wall or something. That way they can sunbathe and also have shelter and feel safe, but they can also get food. So these edges, these borders, are really valuable places of biodiversity. And they can also work really well because they're on the edge, they don't get much foot traffic, they're kind of out of the way. This can be a really nice place for nesting. This can be a really nice place for like pollinators, like planting like a pollinator garden on the edge. This works really nice. And then if we take this into the body, and again, we're going to look at the gut specifically, the edges and the marginal, I would consider these like points of the digestive system where there's a transition into a different part of the digestive system. So for example, think about the point where the stomach becomes the small intestine. I would consider this to be a margin, because the functions of the stomach and the functions of the small intestine are completely different. And because of this, at this border, there is so much happening. There is so much that changes in the digestive system, which means that there's a lot that can go wrong as well. So if we can look at this border, we can see this is where how strong your stomach acid is having a big effect on the digestive function. This is where bile and digestive enzymes are secreted in into the small intestine, which has a big function on the digestive function overall. So if we can look at this border, there's a big thing that's happening here. We can go further down and we can look at the ileocecal valve. So this is like a sphincter-like muscle that connects the small intestine to the large intestine. This is right near where the appendix is, and that's not a coincidence. This is a border. This is a margin. And this is because the function of the small intestine is really digestion and absorption of food, and the secondary function is immunity. And then the colon, so the large intestine, is our bacterial storehouse. It's where we keep the majority of our microflora, and it's also where a lot of fluid and electrolytes are absorbed. So this border in between, this is essential. This is a really important part of your immune system. And it's no surprise that that's exactly where your appendix is, because it's on this border, it's on this margin. So if we look at these different areas where we have borders and margins inside the gut, these are core areas of function, which means these are core areas where things can go wrong. And when things go wrong, they affect everything that's downstream from that. So super important point, applies so perfectly to the gut and the digestive system. You could also apply it to other areas of the body, like where does the adrenals and the hormones connect to the gut? Like where's that border? Where's that margin? It's a bit more difficult to visualize because it's not a physical margin where we've got one thing and then we've got that margin area. It's more biochemical. It's more like neurotransmitters and compounds in your blood. And you could also even consider that your blood is kind of like a margin because it connects all the different stuff in your body. And finally, point number 12, we have creatively use and respond to change. So in a garden, this is kind of really connected to that first point, observe and interact, but with a bit more of a long-term view. So it's accept that things change over time. As trees get bigger, they will have a bigger canopy. As your pond exists for a longer period of time, you will have much more biodiversity, and maybe you lose a little bit of land that you were growing crops on, but now you've got a significant increase in biodiversity coming to that land. Accept it. It's a really good thing to have happen. And this applies so nicely to the body because healing is a journey, and what you need at one point is going to change from what you need at another point. There've actually been several times in my own healing journey where the thing that I needed to heal, like a supplement or a modality that was absolutely essential for my survival and for my healing, became the thing that was causing me to stay sick. And holding on to that thing still because it had so much benefit for me in the past was actually the thing that was stopping me from healing, and I had to let it go. So this is really a good indicator of how we can creatively respond and use this change. As your symptoms change, as you heal, as you become a new and different person, we have to let go of the things that don't serve us anymore and step into that new role, become that new person, and add the new supports that we need. This could be different supplements, or maybe this could be trying a supplement that in the past made you sick and your body couldn't tolerate and you weren't able to receive, and now it becomes the thing that you need to get through to that next level. But overall, I think that's a really beautiful point to finish things on. So I know this was a little bit different. If you watched all the way to the end, you probably find it quite interesting. So let me know what you think. I also thought it might be nice to let you know that if you watched it all the way to the end, you probably like the gut health thing and the gardening thing. This channel is really about gut healing, about detox, about the healing process. My wife and I, we actually have another YouTube channel where we talk and we show you everything that we're doing on our homestead. We want to follow many of these principles, regenerative agriculture. We want to get some cute little chickens and some goats and some really cool projects that we want to do. So if you want to follow along with that, if you're interested in that side of things, make sure you come over and subscribe to the other channel. But I thought this would be a really nice kind of crossover video because so many of these permaculture principles work just perfectly in healing and in gut health in general. So let me know if you found it interesting. And if you want more of the gardening, homestead kind of stuff, make sure you check out other channel and put it in the description somewhere below. But that's everything for me today. Hope you find it really interesting and helpful. And you take care. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.